I want to talk today about a number of interconnected MGTOW and MRA or men's rights related issues. Now, whatever the content of this video might be, I'm not intentionally trying to court controversy or stoke the fires of anger in people, but I feel that it's an unfortunate natural consequence of attempting to be intellectually honest. I tend not to worry too much about the fallout of what I'm about to say, and I just need to stick to my guns, and that's more important to me. Now, I'm going to be talking about a number of different subjects. I'm going to be relating each subject to the other one. My video, MGTOW Stream of Consciousness, I talked about possibilities for the future. Now, I want to propose a possible outcome for all of this, that is to say, the civilizational project, say, in the next 20 or 30 years. I'm not one of these people that believes in a civilizational collapse. I don't think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, but it could happen at any time nevertheless. But I do think, more likely than not, the current state of affairs is suggestive of a return to a more traditionalist mindset. And what's the evidence for this? I think people, particularly women, are becoming more and more aware that men don't want to get married because of the numerous disadvantages that men suffer when they are married. And traditionalism, or the traditional setup, need not be invoked again simply because civilization itself has collapsed or there's some technological crisis. I mean, these are certainly things that could precipitate that, but I think it could happen simply due to organic social pressures. Let's face it, we have to be honest with ourselves. By and large, women are going to look for the best deal. And then, when the best deal is no longer available, they'll look for the second best deal. What is the second best deal after having daddy state and extracting money through the court system or child support from men and from people in general? That's probably to have a quote-unquote protector provider who's going to pay all your bills and you can just kind of chill out at home and do whatever you want. And I think more and more women, I've observed this through YouTube and through comments and just listening to women in general through dialogue, are becoming aware of this. They're just becoming aware that the situation is becoming less and less sustainable, and more men are opting out of marriage. And I think that in order to, quote-unquote, save marriage, something I have absolutely no interest in whatsoever, just taking a look at these things from other people's perspectives, women will be willing to make certain concessions, even if the state is still in place. I think that the long and short of it is, most likely the next scenario in the next few decades is either continuation of the trend we see now, that sort of a lengthening and a strengthening of it, as opposed to attenuation and stagnation. Or when people have just had enough, they're just going to say, okay, well, let's just go back to this setup. And it might be something in between. But I don't think that the situation is going to continue forever. Let's face it, most men want to get married, they want to fucking inseminate women and blah, blah, blah. You know the deal. Now, in saying this, I also want to say that whatever people might believe, whatever is claimed, and certainly in individual cases, some men going their own way might be simultaneously MRAs or men's rights activists, there is, to a certain extent, a profound difference. Notice that the very fact remains that most men who go their own way, and this is based purely on observation and been around for several years, appear to me to be the kinds of men who are just waiting for something to change in order to get married. And that's not to say it's going to happen in their lifetime, but these would be the kind of men who otherwise would have gotten married. They would have done the 2.5 kids and a dog and blah, 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 blah. And this fits. This is the category that fits a lot of MRAs who have either already been married or would like to. I can think of a number of individuals off the top of my head. And we have to really think about a potential conflict of interest. And it's not to say that I don't see these men who are the marriage-willing types, but don't do it or postpone it because of the potential consequences as enemies per se. But I don't think necessarily they share the same interest as other men, particularly as other men going their own way. And it's somewhat disconcerting, or rather, it concerns me to a certain extent. And I'm going to tell you why later on in the video, because I'm going to link it up to some messages that I received within the last week and a half. But there are certainly deviant interests here. And what I mean by that is that if you've always wanted to get married, I mean, you can remember the rather now famous line that Gerwitz Watt said, and I believe it was in an interview I had with her just a couple of years ago, where she said, she knows one MRA whose dream it was to inseminate women and, and reproduce and just be a workhorse, and he can't do that, so he's an MRA now. I think this is standard fare. I think this is actually quite common. It would have been nice had it been possible. And let's face it, the majority of men operate along these lines. I'm not saying this is bad or good, I'm just describing it. My concern, not only for myself, but for MGTOW who are more of the individualistic bent, people could rant on about collectivism, but talk about just buying into the system and just always want to get married. I mean, I know that's instinct, but still. I'm concerned for us because there is a separation of interests here. I'm concerned that not only do these kinds of men, or would these kinds of men throw the individualistic kinds of MGTOW under the bus, or those men who just have no interest in the whole prospect under the bus, but I'm more concerned, and furthermore, if things were changed, if laws or the court system, whatever, if the entire social hierarchy and the government changed everything, not only would we see a lot of guys going back to the plantation, which that's up to them, but I don't think we would see nearly as much representation in the so-called MGTOW community, because a lot of the guys are going their own way. They're not only one blowjob away, they want to go back to that old system. So what I'm saying is that there are a lot more traditionalist types and right-wing types, for lack of a better descriptor, within the MGTOW community than one thinks, and certainly within men's rights. Obviously, I have nothing against being a father. I mean, I'm not interested in it, but the very concept of father's rights, for example, includes that. The question that you have to pose at the end of the day, at the end of all of this, is what happens to the individuals, the individualistic men who just want to live their own life quietly and do their own thing. Now, a lot of this, a lot of the men's rights stuff, a lot of the MGTOW, it's going in that direction. That is to say, if we can fix the system, then everything will be fine. But the rest of us, the people who just, don't really fit the status quo, we're going to not only get left in the dust, we're going to get shat on. As I said, and I'll explain why a bit later. And that's why I'm saying that I don't really trust the tradcon gone MGTOW types very much at all. It's not that I consider them enemies per se, but these are not people that I necessarily could call comrades in arms, because they might be comrades in arms today, but the next day, some hypothetical morrow, totally hypothetical morrow, when everything's okay and you can get married again, they're the ones who are going to fucking tell you to man up, and tell you that you're a pussy, tell you that you need to get married, you need to contribute to society, you need to do all of this shit. These are the kinds of guys who are now allegedly going their own way. They're going to tell you that kind of shit on that imaginary morrow. And that is disconcerting. It might be, by and large, that some men going their own way, and certainly some men's rights activists really are interested in just individual rights. That is, letting men be whatever they want and do whatever they want. But if you look at the literature, I don't remember the psychologist's name, but the marriage strike, it all revolves around a kind of resurrection, an attempt to reestablish these institutions for better or worse. And any kind of focused political movement frankly speaking, is going to have to focus on certain issues. And those issues in this case being highly politicized ones related to the government and social interaction, they're not going to be able to speak frankly. I mean, one advantage that we have, that I have as an individual man going his own way, beyond my dedication to trying to be as best as I can intellectually honest, is saying, look, men and women are radically different. And this idea of trying to amend something that has always been problematic, the male-female human relationship, to something that it never was, without telling people the truth, I mean, I think that's problematic. But I can say that. I can say, look, men want this and women want that, and here's how men operate, here's how women operate. I don't need to polish it up. I don't need to sweeten it. I don't need to make it sound like it's a sweet deal to people. But if you're going to be involved in politics and that sort of thing, you have to. Now, one issue, repeated issue that you see constantly being brought up, and is that a lot of MRAs and some MGTOW to a certain extent have issues with the concept of sort of MGTOW separatism. MGTOW separatism is what they call it. They use this term to describe some, or if not many, MGTOW, including myself, this idea that we're separatists, we're trying to separate women from men and vice versa. And I would claim I'm simply being descriptive, even though in my own life I tend not to associate with women very often, because generally speaking, I only talk to or associate people that either have something interesting to say, that is, I can learn something from them, or I consider them amiable, loyal, and, have something interesting to say. But, yeah, MGTOW separatism, this idea that we're trying to prevent the repair of the broken bonds between men and women. The thing is, a lot of these guys who claim this, MRAs and some MGTOW, they don't get is that nothing really has been broken. The environment just changed. Men and women are the same as they've been for tens of thousands of years. And I don't know how often I have to say that, but I guess I'll say it until I drill into everyone's heads. Nothing's been broken, it's just the environment. And of course, that is the major issue, because the minute the environment is quote-unquote fixed, things will go back to some other setup between men and women. And this is what concerns me, because then it's going to be the individual men under attack. Now, it's true there have always been bachelors, but what these guys who have something against quote-unquote MGTOW separatists, MGTOW who are more individualistic than others, who just don't find the whole Lord of Insemination, work your ass off till you drop dead routine to be particularly alluring, they have a problem with us because they'll say that we're separatist. We're trying to destroy the family. We're trying to sever bonds between men and women, blah, 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 blah. More importantly, we're not quiet. We don't just sit there. I mean, of course they wouldn't have a problem if we were just bachelors, and this air quotes, doing our own thing but not really talking about it. No, their issue with MGTOW as a concept is that we talk about it. And to some extent, we encourage men, to the extent that they want to take that path, go down that road, we encourage them to go down that road. They're against the idea of propagating certain concepts in the free market of ideas. Okay? This is why I don't really trust a lot of these guys who are either going their own way because marriage isn't a sound option in terms of finances, etc., or MRAs whose primary reason for getting involved in it goes along those lines. And like I said, I don't consider them enemies, but I suspect the day that things change, they will turn their backs on their fellow MGTOW brethren, and they will turn their backs on their fellow men the second that happens. Why? Because they've got what they wanted. They want the status quo. They want a perpetuation of the status quo. Now I'm going to get back to this in a bit. I'm going to go off on a tangent. I'm going to relate this. Now, over the years, I've received not an incredible number, but a fair number of messages by subscribers of mine who have either been injured or disabled or have a disability, and particularly the ones who at some point in time were, and I'm using air quotes, competent. That is, they could work, they could provide, they could do all these things. This was to them one of the most devastating blows they could have suffered. They were, no longer the people they used to be, no longer the quote unquote the men they used to be, right? And they've told me over the years. I mean, the messages are always different, but there's a similar bent to them that they never realize until they actually had the injury or suffered the disability that basically put them out of the game, out of the race, how much of their identities were tied to them being simply utilities, and more importantly, how they defined themselves that way. And it was only until absorbing, say, Barbarossa's material or my material that they realized that there might be something beyond that to their own identities. That maleness, whatever that might be, masculinity will have to be, at least in their cases, something that needs to be decided on an individual basis. And over time, some of them who've decided to write back on occasion have reported to me of being in a much greater state of mind, a kind of inner peace, if you will, much more so than they ever had in their lives, even before they had their disability or their injury that prevented them from doing the routine that everyone expected of them. And then it's almost a revelation because they realized they had no fucking clue who they were when they were just running the rat race. They had no idea. Related to this, I have a friend. He's not going his own way, and I've since lost a lot of contact with him. But it's not because of a distaste or dislike for him. Anyway, he has Lyme disease. I'll try to make a long story short. For a long time, he worked as an auditor. He was married to a Chinese woman working in Switzerland, earning a lot of money. All of a sudden, he started getting these headaches. Long story short, it turned out to be Lyme disease. She left him. Thankfully, she didn't take him for all the money he had because she found some better catch, married him, some Swiss guy, quite wealthy. He's on permanent disability. He's only 35. He can't work. He can't function. And I've talked to him many times about this, but he told me, he can't live without. He needs women in his life. So he found the only woman who would be willing to settle down with him, some kind of, in my personal assessment, neurotic nutcase, but whatever. He wouldn't listen to me that there are better options out there. Now, why am I bringing all of this up? Why am I bringing the disability stuff up? Why am I bringing my friend up who, he could have been one of these men who had discovered a better self, even if he's suffered a loss of some sort? Well, I bring it up because to a large extent, I can relate to it. I'm not disabled in a conventional sense, but as many of you know, my life is dominated by my sleeping schedule. On any given day or set of weeks, I'm either non-functional, functional, and in the past I've experienced states of living death. That's what I call it, living death. And I've talked about this before, and I've talked about it in my illness and health video. And this is related to the idea of, as I just mentioned, being disabled. Because when I was doing my old routine, doing a 9 to 5, and I wasn't doing it because I never found it fascinating. I never found that whole run the rat race thing interesting. It bored me to tears. Not only that, I was living in a state of living death. And why? Why did Stardust, and I'll get to the reasons why I'm saying this, decide to just drop all of that, with all my education, with my background, and just do what I do these days, which are basically odd jobs. I do some online proofreading, I do some physical labor, and just get by. Why did I decide to become much poorer than I used to be? Well, the reason's quite simple. I am, to a differentiated degree on any given day, somewhat disabled. And when I was running the rat race, I tell you, I was living in a state of living death. I was undead practically. My insomnia was terrible, and one thing I've not mentioned is my insomnia is highly characterized by nocturia, that is nighttime urination. This has been extensively checked out by urologists and by many different, and they think it's a neurological condition. But in any event, what happened back then when I was working, say, full-time as a translator in an office, doing insane jobs, hours and what have you, I mean, I don't even know how I was functioning. Somehow I got by, but the stress caused my insomnia to worsen, caused the nocturia to worsen. And even before that, when I was working in Asia in situations where I was working 7 days a week often, certainly 6 days a week every time, sometimes 7 days a week, with no holiday time, I was just a zombie. I was a walking zombie. I'd get up sometimes 10 times a night to urinate, and I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. And, so I evaluated all of this, not to mention some of these relationships which exacerbated it. And I evaluated all of this, and then I decided, I never wanted to do this in the first place. Why don't I take a hit? Why don't I become poorer and see what happens? And you know what happened? Overall, my health improved. Yes, I will always have this disability. My life will always be determined by how well I sleep or how well I don't sleep. I'm not normal and never will be. But it has improved over the last few years. I used to get colds all the time, working these ridiculous hours and doing all this shit. And guess what? Maybe I get a cold once a year, and sometimes I've got an entire year without getting a cold. What I'm trying to say is that I've traded off money, becoming a lot poorer, for a much more manageable work schedule, for health. And quite frankly, I'm happy I did it. My sense of well-being is a lot greater than it used to be. People go on about Stardust being dysphoric and what have you. Oh, you should have heard me when I was, stuck at a translator's office or teaching a bunch of fucking spoiled brats. That was dysphoria. That was dysphoria. Living death. I felt like living death, and people looked at me. It was living death. The worst working schedule I ever had, I gained over 40 pounds. It's just because of the stress, the hormone levels, you deposit fat, couldn't exercise, all of this. Now, I've since lost that and a lot more. That's not an issue now. But my point is, quite simply, that I've created at least temporary path for myself that has done my health fairly well. I'm feeling better than I used to. Overall, I sleep better. It's very rare to have the living death states that I've had in previous years. And this is because MGTOW is essentially a path of enlightenment. It's learning as an individual what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you're disabled or have a health condition, you're going to have to learn to cope with that. And it doesn't really help to just go with the grain if that grain hasn't been leading to positive results. If, in my case, it's led to countless health problems, from colds, flus, to just total non-functionality, you need to find your own individual path. And this is why I mentioned prior some of these men who've sent me messages saying that they become disabled and what have you. It's really important also to keep in mind that none of us can know the future. None of us can know the future. Whatever that future might entail, we don't know what's going to happen to us. Now, I know people don't like to think about it. We could drop dead tomorrow, we could fall ill, we could become incapacitated. I don't want to think about it. It's unpleasant. But that's reality. And if that were to happen, you need to be in a position to realign yourself with that new reality. If your identity is so wrapped up in that other crap, in the rat race, and pleasing women and pleasing the world and showing how much you can do, because that's what you are, a human doing, as the famous and now largely defunct Man-Woman myth said, you're never going to arrive at even a kernel of truth as to who you are. And you're never going to find the best scenario for you. Why am I bringing all this up? Well, some of this is related to this temporary policy I have with accepting video requests. As I said, I've accepted in part the consequence that I've become a lot poorer and traded that greater wealth for poverty in exchange for greater health. I think overall it was a worthwhile trade-off. And I'll say in a video format, I've written it many times, that back then I should not have used the word never. I should never have said, there you go, never have said, I'll never take donations. It was an error, and I concede that. And I'd rather be wrong about things, correct myself, and learn what the correct answer is than go on denying things. I should not have said that, and that's unfortunate. I didn't have the foresight to realize what may or may not have been. But as I've mentioned in writing, and now here in this form, this concession, and I apologize to the people who felt some sense of offense to that. But it's interesting that it's really gotten to the point where it's become absurd. Not only in the comment section. I mentioned you've probably seen some of the comments, I'm a sellout on this and that. What's really interesting, and this is not a criticism, is all these people who are complaining about a voluntary system of donation. Do you know, and I've done the calculations, and it's not a criticism, it's just an observation, less than 1% of my total subscriber base has ever given me a donation of any sort. Less than 1%. This is not a criticism and not accusing or castigating anyone. It's completely voluntary, and that's the point. So the chances that these people who feel offended and have hurt feelings and feel it's an affront to their well-being actually giving me a donation, my point is that nobody is really suffering because of this. Less than 1%. And more likely than not, use ad blockers, so I'm not even getting any revenue from the ads that I have on some of my videos. So what are you bitching about by now? I've conceded an error I've made. What's your point? Are you going to go on and on about this? And I'm mentioning this as well because when I made my video request policy video, this temporary thing, which actually I can say with reasonable confidence will come to an end soon, I received a bunch of messages, not too many, very interesting types, and here I'm going to link it up to the beginning of what I said in the video, of so-called men going their own way telling me essentially to man up. And one particular message, those words were used. I need to man up. I need to stop being a pussy. The line was pretty consistent. The line was always very similar. It's like, you shouldn't be doing this. You're a pussy. You're doing, why are you asking for donations? Why don't, you have all this education. Why don't you take a real job? I've explained before. I don't want to live in a state of living death again. Now, at some point in time, I will need to fine-tune this. This is my path. As an individual path, that's a MGTOW path. I will need to fine-tune what I'm doing to the point where I can actually start saving money again as a part of just living and going beyond living expenses and move beyond just getting by. That's true, and I'm trying to fine-tune it and think of ideas and solutions to that end so as to not have to go back there. Now, if you haven't thought about it, I've actually seriously considered going back to old professions. I've actually turned down interviews, and there's a lot of disinformation about me, this idea that I just can't find a job. That's not true. I'm almost certain I could find one of my old-style jobs. I just don't want to because I don't want to be in living death. Now, you can call me a pussy and man up and blah, 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 all you want, you people. But I have a little thought experiment, actually an experiment you can engage in. You can simulate my health condition almost perfectly without having it, and then you can report back to me. So my suggestion is that you consume copious amounts of diuretics during the day, especially before you go to bed. You allow yourself to sleep no more than 5 hours a night, no more, and intersperse with no sleep to maybe 1 to 3 hours. The diuretics are important because you need to get up and urinate frequently at night. You need to do this for about a month, and tell me how well you function. And then, of course, because this also happens, you have to go for 2 days with no sleep whatsoever. These are the circumstances of living death that I endured when I was working these ridiculously stressful jobs that I didn't really enjoy and didn't want to do. All right? If you can simulate that and make it to the end of the month, then hey, that's pretty impressive. But guess what? I powered through all of that shit for years. For years. And the funny thing about you motherfuckers sending me these kinds of messages is you wouldn't even make it to the end of the month. If you went for 2 weeks barely getting more than 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night, working a full-time job where you actually have to use your brain, you wouldn't make it past 2 weeks. I'm almost certain of that. So all these people taking offense and sending me messages to man up about this or that and don't do this, the joke's on you. Because I'm quite confident you wouldn't last very long with my condition. And what I've done is made the best of it to the best of my ability and tried to find a solution that works for me. And that solution is I'm not going to go back to being a full-time translator because I don't want to fucking stay in an office or take my work home and work late and feel stressed out and then get fucking 2 hours of sleep and then go to work the next day and fucking gain weight and feel like shit and just be a fucking zombie. I do not want to be that way. And as I said, because less than 1% of my total sub base has ever given me any money, what are you worried about? Yeah, are you worried that, a link to PayPal or a link to Patreon is going to fucking blind you? Are you worried about the ads? You probably block them anyway. I mean, so what's your fucking issue? What's your issue? Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in the shoes of men who discovered that they had an injury or a disability and they couldn't do that anymore. And then they discovered their real selves in the process. And this is what I mean. These guys who were writing me messages, I'm not going to name names, there were a bunch of them. These are the kinds of MGTOW that I don't trust. These, you got to man up. Don't be a pussy. You got to do this. You got to do that. These are the kinds of guys who would tell you, yeah, it's better to suffer continual health deterioration and keep on doing this because somehow, some way that equates to manhood. And it's funny because a lot of MRAs go on about compassion for men and boys, and here you have these guys who quite frequently don't like MGTOW if they're full-fledged MRAs, or if they're MGTOW, they're only doing it until the marriage strike is over, and they're running their mouths off, and they sound like a bunch of feminists, basically. Like I said, if you don't like the current policies, which I've apologized for, I made a mistake of lack of foresight in the past, then unsubscribe to me. Don't watch the videos. No one's forcing you to. And like I said, less than 1% of my total sub base has ever given a donation of any sort, and I've calculated it. And that's not a criticism to people who don't. Everyone is getting free videos, basically. You're getting free videos, and the ones who actually want to give something back in return, that's up to them. So what's your issue with that? This has nothing to do with manning up or not manning up. This is an issue to do with your own fucking tradcon fucking bullshit, quite frankly. And I'd like to say that these tradcon types, these man-up types who are allegedly going their own way, or MRAs, were not part of this movement. But I suspect there is a fair number of them out there. There's a fair number of them out there, and I don't trust them. I don't trust them because their interests don't intersect with my interests, quite frankly. I want to do my own thing. I want to find my own path, and I hope to one day find a path that will allow me to also save money without completely sacrificing my health with my health condition. And if people have an issue with that, these guys, that's fine. I'm going to find my own path. I enjoy making videos for the most part. Certain kinds of videos I enjoy making more than others. And these videos are free. They're free. I mean, most people use ad blocker. I've mentioned less than 1% people give donations. So what are you fucking bitching about at the end of the day? What are you bitching about? That particular policy, as I said, I'm quite confident will come to an end, the request format, and the people who want to donate can donate, and the people who don't have to. It's always been a voluntary thing. And I can't say I'm shocked at the lack of, say, compassion when I've explained my circumstances a lot of it, many times. Maybe I've never gone this kind of depth before. But it's just amazing, because I saw what happened to my friend who hasn't gone his own way, when he just lost the ability to concentrate and work. I mean, he was just thrown to the fucking gutter. Women treated him like shit. His old friends didn't even pretended they weren't his friends. He's got nothing. The only thing he's got left is, researching Lyme disease and meeting up with other people who have Lyme disease, and that's his life. Unfortunately. I'm still capable of doing stuff, but I don't want to go back to the point of when I was a zombie, when I don't even know how I got by anymore when I think about it. Somehow I did, but I was feeling a lot worse. A lot worse. Your health comes first. And to those guys who've sent me messages over the years, who have disabilities, and these disabilities eventually, in going your own way, led to a kind of awakening of yourself, I not only sympathize, I empathize. This is our task as men going our own way, ultimately, the individualistic kind, at least. We need to recognize our limitations. As Clint Eastwood said, a man's got to know his limitations. There's no point in pushing yourself beyond the brink to impress a bunch of people who don't give a shit about you to begin with. I'm not doing that shit anymore. Ever. I'd rather be dead, quite frankly. And the people sending me messages of this sort, I mean, you got to sort your own minds out. Like I said, you can, in my case, you can actually reproduce it as an experiment. You can consume diuretics. You can put the alarm on that'll wake you up at 3 in the morning instead of 6 or 7. And you can do this for weeks on end. And like I said, most of you motherfuckers wouldn't make it past 2 weeks. I guarantee it. So you can kindly stop sending messages and shut the fuck up and just live your own life. I'm not interfering with it, and the rest of the MGTOWs out there aren't interfering with either. But I do have to say, I am concerned about this growing number of tradcon types in the MGTOW movement who are just fucking hanging out there, or rather hanging in there until they can get married and fucking knock some women up and do their whole 2.5 kid shit. I don't have a problem with that setup. My problem is that you have a fucking problem with our setup. That is the individualistic MGTOW who just want to do their own thing. They're not interested in DNA propagation and all other bullshit. You want to do that? That's fine. That's what most people want to do. Our issue is that we need to fucking bunker down and really defend our principles as individuals who aren't interested in that kind of shit. And if you're not interested in associating with women, so what? It's a free market of ideas, people. If people catch on to the idea that they can do their own thing, if men catch on to the idea that they can do their own thing, they don't need to bother with women, they can just live their lives, they can walk around wearing jeans and hoodies, and if they can financially get by, they'll be fine. What's your issue with that? What's your issue with that? I'll tell you what the issue is. It's a threat to your own being, because all you fucking tradcon workhorse assholes, at the end of the day, you don't even know what you are beyond the work that you fucking do, because you have no identity and you've never fucking sat down for more than fucking 5 minutes to think about it because you're too busy busting your ass for fucking other people. That's the truth. That's the truth. You don't know what you are. You think male identity is fucking working overtime. Basically, that's it. These types who are in MGTOW or MRAs or whatever, and the rest of them out there, the blue pillars, who more or less think the same thing. They just haven't joined the bandwagon version of MRA and MGTOW. Their concept of being a male is basically working overtime, and lots of it. You know, getting on the train, wearing your fucking suit and tie monkey suit. That's going your own way to them. That's manning up. Working overtime. The tradcon vision of MGTOW. No. For the rest of us, quite frankly, we're going to do our own thing. And like I said, if you don't like the policies I have in place, all of which are voluntary, unsubscribe. I don't need subs like you, and I don't fucking need subs to send me these idiotic messages either. You know, if you're disappointed, then be disappointed and seek knowledge and information elsewhere. That's totally cool with me. I don't want to converse with you anyway. I think that's all I have to say, basically. So guys, be on the lookout for these types. I've seen an influx of these types. I've actually now received messages from these types. Men going their own way who aren't really going their own way, whose definition of manhood is working overtime. Be on the lookout for these types. Watch out for them in the comments. And hey, don't be surprised when a lot of them turn out to be MRAs, because we all know the type. Just waiting for the fucking marriage strike to be over to jump on the fucking bandwagon. You want to do that, that's fine. But the rest of us are going to look out for our own interests. And if we need to protect those interests against the interests of society at large, we'll do that on our own terms. That's all I got to say. Take care.